Good morning, everyone. Um, again, another nice, beautiful day. Yeah. Sometimes we have to appreciate every small good things because life can be just quite challenging. And if we don't learn how to appreciate the small good things, your mind can be overwhelmed with a lot of negativities, you know, about yourself, about your life, about the situation in the world can be very um, burdening and yeah, um, depressing, negative, and all of that. So we have to learn to be appreciative and gratitude with whatever small, even is small, good things. Yeah. Okay. Again, we will start as usual with a short breathing meditations, followed by generating good intention for being here. Keep yourself relaxed, comfortable, and keep your back straight. Always helpful to be more alert. And try to keep your focus or attention on the breath, observing and being mindful and aware of what you are observing with the breath. Training our mind to be that object, the breath. If you ever find your mind distracted, wandering, or ready to get distracted, you can always bring back your attention to the breath and try to keep your focus on the breath. Be with the breath. Once our mind is settled down in moment present, then we can try to contemplate that being obsessed, thinking too much about, how well I'm doing, how bad I'm doing, how bad my life is, how wonderful my life is, so forth. Being too obsessed, thinking too much about that is not so healthy. Doesn't lead to happiness. In short, being too obsessed with self-importance and self-cherishing is not healthy because it leads to a lot of negative thought to arises because of that. Due to all those negative thoughts, it makes us more unhappy, more miserable. And when we ourselves are more miserable, more unhappy, we are unable to help others. Therefore, in order to have more healthy mind, more peaceful, more happy mind, more peaceful, more happy life, and to be able to be more health benefit to others, we should train our mind to reduce being obsessed with the self or self-important or self-cherishing. Instead, we should try to train our mind to have true, genuine empathy, concern, love, compassion to other beings, not only just oneself. And such attitude might not come naturally for many of us. Therefore, we need to train our mind through the training over the times, and without effort, we can feel naturally. And to train the mind, we need to contemplate, meditate, practice correctly, continuously. For that, we need to remind of those practices, the importance of the practices, as well as continue to study, learn. Therefore, I'm going to listen, engage in the discussions, reflection, contemplations. Not only listen, but trying to integrate as much as possible from what we learn, especially those which we find helpful. May all of us coming here together, giving our precious time, energy, resources to listen. May all of that become cause and conditions to actualize our awakening mind of the bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. And gradually obtaining our highest potential, the fully awakened state. So we can be greatest health benefit each and every sentient beings effortlessly. Without the limitations like at the moment. Okay. So you can try to do the refuge and go to the prayers. Once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. But I merit I create to listen to the Dharma. May I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Padu Dani Kyapsu Che Dagi Che Give Sonam Ki Dola Penje Sangye Duba Sho Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Padu Dani Kyapsu Che Dagi Che Give Sonam Ki Dola Penje Sangye Duba. So we just started this very powerful facts and the teachings of Lojong or mind training, known as 7 point of mind training by Kadamba Master Geshe Chekawa. And so of course, basically, the main theme or the subjects of this training and practice is actualizing the awakening mind, the ultimate and conventional awakening mind. And then engaging into the actions through the attitude of that awakening mind of Bodhisattva. How to engage in our life, how to engage with others, in our everyday life, through the practice of that awakening mind. So that is the main kind of theme, and then of course points, and then in relation to that, then there is the how to train in the preliminary as the basis for the actual practice. It's like when you engage in any kind of things, before the actual concert, before the actual game, before the final, you have to do preliminaries, trainings, whatever other things, so that you can perform better when the actual concert, during the actual event, during the actual game itself, and similarly, the preliminary that help as the foundations to do the actual practice better. And then, of course, the actual practice training to awaken the mind, and then, the precepts and the advices of that. So those mainly on that, with the 7 point is presented. And then in terms of the first presentations is in the actual root text, it says first train the mind in the preliminary practices. That's the first point. So preliminary for what? Is a preliminary for the actual main practice of the to awakening mind, what we known as ultimate awakening mind and conventional awakening mind, or bodhicitta. So for that, in order that practice to become strong, effective, powerful, then you need strong foundations or basis of preliminary. So that is where it starts with. It doesn't go much details, but it just starts first train your mind in the preliminary, as a basis, as the foundation for the actual practice. In preliminary practices, we went through this Lamrim, recently, we just finished that by the third Dalai Lama, the refined gold, the essence of refined gold, the title of that. And that, so in the Lamrim, as we went through, there were three kind of chapters. The practice of what is known as small scope, the practice of middle scope, the practice of great scope. This main practice of Lojong is the practice of great scope. So preliminary is the practice of small scope and the practice of middle scope are the preliminary. That is why in Lambrim, when it presented, it is presented the small scope, because then that becomes preliminary or foundation for the middle scope. And then middle scope practice is presented, so that that practice of middle scope become basis and the foundation for the great scope. And then the great scope is the main practice of the bodhisattvas. But in order for that practice to become a powerful, effective, you need to have strong basis and foundation of middle scope. And for that strong practice, you need to have a basis and strong practice of middle scope. So that is why that is presented that way. And here, when we talk here, when the author says first train the preliminary, that is what is referring to those practice. And if we kind of summarize all these practices, then maybe we can summarize in the three, mainly three, four practices. First is, maintaining awareness of the preciousness of human life in every day. That is one, precious human life. And that is we try to be aware and maintain that awareness every day, if possible, every moment, this preciousness, this human life. When we have that awareness and when we are able to maintain that awareness, how precious this human life, then, we will utilize this human life better. We will not waste so much of it. Instead, we will make it meaningful and be able to utilize it, because you see how precious it is, how valuable it is, how precious it is, And then also it leads to a sense of appreciation and gratitude. Even though we might have many other challenges, difficulty in our life, in our personal life, in the country we live in, the world that we live in, there's so many things happening. But at the same time, even though there is so much negativity is happening, even though there is so much challenges, even though there is so much difficulty, but to recognize and be aware that I have this incredible, precious human life, That can be one uplifting factors in your life, we need everything that can help us to uplift our mind, especially in those difficult times when everywhere you see there is so much negativities. Everyone has their personal, individual challenges, difficulties. On top of that, then you see, so much challenge, negativity, difficult, pain, sufferings around yourself, families, friends. Then if you go there, the country that we live in, then the world that we live in, and sometimes that can be very, difficult, depressing, hopeless, So we need, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we need to uplift our mind, to be positive. Anything that can help us from becoming insane, because then our mind can become insane after some time when we don't have something that uplift our mind. And so such practice can be very, yes, I have all these challenges. Yes, there is so much challenge around there, but despite that, at least I have this incredible precious human life. If I use it properly, in the right way, I can make it so meaningful and, achieve, high purpose, high goal, not only for oneself, for also others. Of course, there is, in the Lam Rim, there's a very detailed, different meditation practice in relation to precious human rebirth or precious human life. I think I don't need to go in all details because we just went with the Lam Rim, So I just kind of, the main thing is, with this precious human life, if we use it in the right way, if we are able to use in the right way, meaningful way, then, we can achieve inner peace, joy, and happiness for ourselves with this human life. We have the potential to do that. This human life has the potential to achieve lasting inner peace, joy, and happiness. Not only for oneself, but also for others. By achieving that yourself, and through the compassion and the wisdom and skillful means, that also we will be able to help others to achieve that lasting true inner peace and happiness. What precious can it be there more than that? What pressure can be that all external objects, things, they cannot really give us inner peace, joy, and happiness. It can only give you some physical, some pleasure and comfort. But not real inner peace and joy and happiness. But with this human life, if we utilize it correctly, we can do that. We can achieve that. We can achieve, as I mentioned, our high potential, fully awakened state. With that, one can help all others to achieve that awakening state. And so that is why how precious it is. And when you realize how precious it is, you don't want to waste it. And you make most of it. At the moment, we waste our life so much. We waste our life so much because sometimes we are not aware of that preciousness. We don't see that we don't understand such preciousness. Mm. So that is the first point of this preliminary practice is maintaining the awareness of the preciousness of human life every year, every month, every week, every day, if possible, every moment. That is the first preliminary. Second preliminary practice, being aware to the reality of that the life come to end. Is the reality that a lot of time that maybe we don't think about it. We don't have that awareness all the time. Maybe once in a while we have that awareness for a short time. You lose someone very dear, close in your life, and you begin to see, oh, lives come to end. And my life could come end because I just experienced someone that I've known so well, closely. His or her life has come to end. But that awareness, how long it remains, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month, and then again we forget. And back to the normal. Again, we don't have that awareness that life could come to end. That reality of that life could come to end, anytime. Anytime. Not only anytime to me, Sometimes we feel like, life could come to end. Life is going to come to end, and it could come, but also it could come to others, but not to ourselves sometimes, It's like watching a movie. It's happening there, but it seems like it's not me, And so trying to keep that awareness, trying to have that awareness of this fact and this reality that the life does come to end. As much as this human life is very precious, even though this human life is very precious, at the same time, it comes to the end. That is also reality. That the life comes to an end. Not only it comes to an end, it could come anytime. And so we have to prepare to be ready anytime. That's the key. Are we ready? It becomes 10 years. Are we ready if it comes in 5 years? Are we ready if it comes in 1 year, this year? Are we ready if it comes in this month? Am I ready if it comes in this week? The fact, reality is it can come anytime. It's not just we're just making up stories. It's the fact, reality. It's going to come to end. We don't know when it's going to come. It could come anytime. So when we have that awareness, then, we started to prepare ourselves. And when you prepare yourself, when it does come, whenever it comes, you are more ready. When you are more ready, you have less struggles, less pain, less guilt, regret, less feeling, oh, I should have done that. I should have done that. Now I don't have time. I shouldn't have done this. all this, could come. But if you have prepared yourself, you're ready, so you have less struggle, less pain. And when you are able to go through the reality of the death, end of the life, with less struggle, less pain, not only is good for you, but also is good for everyone who's left behind. They suffer less because they saw you dealing with much peacefully. It gives them comfort. Despite they lost someone very close, dear to their life, but to see them passing peacefully with the dignity, with such a ease, it gives them comfort. It gives them confidence in them that the death doesn't have to be painful. So again, not only it affects you positively, but it also affects everyone that's left behind. And that is able to because they are more prepared. And if someone is more prepared when they know that it could come. So then when someone is more aware that it will come sooner than that, and they will start preparing for that sooner than later. At the moment, even though we have a little bit of behind, we are going to die and it come, but like we are still not this month, not this year. That kind of thoughts. Definitely not this day, not this week. I feel just fine, There is no clear indication that I'm going to die this week, this month, this year. So our mind is more thinking of. So when you think I'm not going to die this year, I am in less urgent to prepare for it. I keep on. I want to prepare, but maybe after next year, because this is not going to happen this year. I understand the importance of preparations, but I will do coming years because next 5 years I'm not going to die. So I have a lot of time to prepare for that. That is it. And that is why we keep on postponing and not preparing now. And then by not preparing that, if things come much more early than we expected, which happens to most people, most beings, then we are left with unprepared and lead into a lot of chaos, for yourself, for others. Sometimes you wonder, like someone passed away and then all mess are left their children to take care of. And all this conflict and fight, all these things, why didn't they prepare? Why couldn't they make it easy that it shouldn't happen? Because they were not expecting to die so soon. They thought they had the time to do all this before they pass away, but the death came much earlier than they thought. So they didn't have the time to prepare all of that. All the mess that is left in some cases, the children's, the families fighting for years and years, all this, and so many other things, because again, so how it can affect very people that you love, that you don't want them to suffer. They suffer because we're not prepared in so many different ways. And the reason we are not prepared was because we thought we had time to do that later. So that is, and not only life come to end, this precious human life, even it is a precious, still it come to end. Not only it come to end, it happens to everyone. It happens to everyone, being aware that you are no exception, and not all any sentient beings exception to that. So being aware of that all the time, being aware of all the time that life does come to end, and it happens to everyone go through that, everyone experience that, Mm. So trying to have that, keeping that understanding and that awareness all the time. That is what, when we talk about realizations, spiritual realizations, is not just understanding it, not just understanding and then having that understanding or awareness one moment. When you talk about spiritual realizations, meaning that you have that awareness all the time. All the time. And so that is what we try to practice, and trying to keep that awareness, all the time, not allowing it to die, and keep your the fire of that awareness all the time. And with the combinations of this awareness of the precious human life, and the life come to end, and it come to everyone, and it can come any times. Through that, then inspire you or give you the energy to make your life more meaningful, sense of feeling urgency, instead of always saying tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. Certain things that you find important in your life, including our spiritual practice, something you feel, close to your heart, something you feel meaningful, helpful. But a lot of time we keep on postponing. Maybe I will start next week, or maybe next month, next year, and we keep on doing that. A lot of important, we feel important, but like we keep on kind of pushing it back, the date, postponing. We don't feel so urgency because of that, because that we don't feel like, we feel like we have enough time to prepare all of that before, or handle and prepare that before the life come to end. And then that can be very deceptive, misleading, which has happened to many others, and it could be happening to us. So with that understanding, awareness, then we try to prepare now whatever you feel is important, including if you feel your spiritual path, your spiritual practice, Dharma practice is important, then you don't want to keep on postponing every opportunity, every time that you have, you try to utilize those time, opportunity to practice, to put them into practice, to and to prepare yourself better, so that, while you are alive at the time of death, there's more peace. There's less mental, emotional struggles, and less pain and struggles and chaos, but there's more calmness, more peacefulness. Mm. And that peaceful mind, calm mind at the time of death, and also the positive mind, then it also affect your futures, what happens after that. You know. So mm. And then, so in Lamrim again, those who are interested to study more on this preliminary, then you can go back to Lamrim. And in Lamrim, there is again many practice meditation on that impermanent in general, and especially the dead impermanence. Different meditation, different practices related with that. And um, so again, as I mentioned, I don't need to go all here. Since we already went, and again, if you are more, still want to learn more, there is all these resources that you can study, learn, you know, um, different meditation, different practices, um, related to the same topics, to have that awareness, the whole practice, meditation, is to have that awareness, not only have that awareness, to have that awareness all the time. That is the key. Until we have that, what we call spiritual realization, which I mentioned, to have that awareness, not just one time, not one time a day, but to have that awareness all the time. And so that is what we want to have. And so there are many different practice meditations related with that. So one can, by following those different meditation practice, then one try to keep that awareness. And when you have that awareness, then of course, when you have this awareness all the time of the presence of human life, and this life come to the end, then it gives you different perspective to the life. You see life slightly different. It gives you different perspective, and it helps you to direct your energies where you want to drive your energies towards. At the moment, a lot of time we drive our energy towards not so meaningful. A lot of not so important, not so meaningful, samsaric things. But once you have that awareness all the time, it shifts, your perspective and your minds. And one would be inspired and give more energies, inspirations to drive your energy towards more meaningful, towards more your spiritual path, towards more meaningful, and thereby making your life, more, more meaningful. The third preliminary practice, as a preliminary practice for this Lojong practice, is recalling, all the time about the karma, what we does, with our territorial body, speech, and mind every day, virtues, non-virtues, all of them has consequences and effect. Similar to this, the saying, what goes around comes around. What you sow, what you get. That is what it is. The karma is What you sow is what you get. What goes around is comes around. That is what is. The only things is what goes around, it comes around. Sometimes it comes around quickly. Sometimes it takes time. What you sow, sometimes the plant grows very quickly. Sometimes it takes time, but it grows. Some plant grow within a day, depending on what kind of plant you planted. Time. Sometimes within a week, sometimes within a month, different plant. Whether you plant from the seed, whether you plant from a little bigger, whatever, or sometimes it might take years. But just because one took it years, we might think, oh, there is no result of that. We might sometimes think, oh, there is no plant from what you saw because it took so much time, and maybe we even died before you saw that. Do you get it? And so it feel like there was no result of that. But there was a result, it came later, that you didn't see that, but it was there. And that is the only things, that in other words, every our physical actions, every our speech, every our thoughts has consequences. Every our harmful, negative physical actions, speech, thought has negative consequences. Every our positive, helpful, beneficial physical actions, speech, and thought has positive consequences. That is what karma is. So practicing karma means being mindful of your speech, your mind, your actions. Being more mindful of that all the time. Through that mindfulness, trying to avoid any negative physical action, any negative speech, harmful speech, any negative thoughts as much as possible. Through being mindful how your actions and speech and thought have consequences to yourself, to others, with that awareness, with that mindfulness, then trying to engage as much as possible in a helpful, beneficial, positive, or virtuous physical actions, speech, and thought as much as all the time, When you are ready to say something, being mindful, if I say this, or if I say this way, is this going to be helpful? Is it going to be harmful? Before we say that, instead of reacting impulsively, reaction so quickly, learn to give that space in your mind before you respond, before you react, mentally, verbally, physically. That space that you use your mind. If I respond this way, if I react that way, if I say this, if I say this way or that way, if I've such thought, and that is helpful or is it harmful? Whether it's our thought, whether it's our speech, whether it's our actions. And through being able to, we learn not to react, and impulsively, without that space, kind of automatic reactions, we learn to give that space, not to respond, not to react in that automatic way. And once you learn to have that space, then you give the space to contemplate on that. And once you are contemplating on that, and if you see it is not good, it is not helpful, it's harmful, try to not do that. Try to avoid that. Try to avoid that action, that speech, that thought. And if you find it's something helpful, beneficial, meaningful, then you try to have that thought. Try to say that speech. Try to act. That is what, in essence, when you talk about karma, sometimes it can be very complicating. It seems karma sounds very complicating sometimes. But when it comes to practical practice, that is what it is. When it comes to practical practice of karma, is try to avoid any of the action through your three doors, body, speech, and mind, that is harmful. Try to engage into any of the action that are helpful, beneficial through your body, speech, and mind. That is what, on practical level, how you practice the karma is that. Be mindful of those, our three doors, be aware what are harmful, what are beneficial, and then whatever is harmful, try to avoid that. Whatever is beneficial, try to engage in that. If you do that, whether you believe in karma or not, you are practicing karma. If you don't do that, you believe in karma, but it doesn't make much sense, much difference in terms of what you experience, result from your actions. What you experience, what other experience, as a result of consequence of your action, is not dependent on whether you believe in karma or not. If I take someone's life, doesn't matter whether I believe in karma or not. I've hurt someone, I've taken someone's life, and I will get in trouble. I will be arrested. I will be imprisoned. I will have to live with all this guilty and all these negative feelings as a consequence of that actions. So whether I experience all this or not doesn't depend on whether I believe in karma or not. Do you get it? So, so therefore, avoiding any actions that brings harms to others, oneself, we try to avoid that. Any action that help benefit others and oneself, we try to engage in that. And that is, that is what practicing putting the karma into actions. That is what it is. Putting the karma into the action, putting the karma into the practice. When you talk about practice, putting into the action of practice, that is what it is. So that is, so trying to be mindful and recollecting that, all the time, and then throughout the day. If I say throughout the life, it might sound too big project. But if that throughout the day seems possible, isn't it? I can be more mindful throughout the days today. If you can be mindful today, you can be mindful tomorrow. Day by day, it becomes weeks. Week by week, it becomes months. Month by month, it becomes year. Year by year, it becomes your life. So then it doesn't seem big project, or it doesn't seem impossible project. You know, it seems possible. It seems manageable. So the point is taking care of day to day. Mm. And fourth, the fourth um, the fourth preliminary practice, is contemplations, meditating on the nature of the samsara, you know, the nature of samsara, what samsara really means, what's the nature of samsara, So with that understanding, the nature of samsara, you know, and when we talk about samsara, we're not talking about some kind of physical world. A lot of time people, when they hear the samsara, they think this is the planet that we are living in. They always relate with the external world. Oh, samsara, because I'm in this world, because I'm in this place. Real samsara not referring to that. Real samsara is state of mind. When your mind is not free from the karma and the delusions, that is samsara. When your mind is free from the delusion and karma, this very place is nirvana. You are in nirvana. You can achieve nirvana. You are in nirvana state while your body is here. You have achieved nirvana. You have gone beyond samsara. You have gone beyond the samsara. It doesn't mean you take a rocket to some other planet. Okay? You don't have to go any planet. Take a rocket. You don't have to wait, to Elon Musk to create a rocket to take to the nirvana. Okay? You don't have to wait for that. And you don't have to pay for that. You can reach nirvana, the state beyond samsara, while your body is still here. That because your mind is free from the karma and delusions, contaminated karma and delusion. That is what. So the nature of samsara is that as long as we are not free from that contaminated karma and the delusions, there's continued pain, suffering, problems. There's no end to that. We can have temporary relief, but not permanent relief, In samsara, you could have temporary relief here and there, but you cannot have. And I think we all have experienced that in our life with so many things. Some days I have relief with my health. The other days, after some time, when you think, oh, you are feeling good, then something goes wrong. You don't feel good. And then again, whatever treatment, medication, whatever different you do, you get some temporary relief. Then after some time, again, something happens. Same in our relationship. Sometimes we don't have the best relationship. And then we figure out how to create better. and find a solution with, and then we have temporary relief. Seems good, better, but after some time again the conflict comes. If not some same conflict, different conflict come. Again we have struggles and problem with that relationship. Never kind of permanent relief. It's only temporary relief. You know, financial. You can see everything in our life, in everything in our life. You know, life is when the life is driven by the karma and contaminated karma and delusion. To start with is not easy. To start with is not easy. Challenging. You know, and then then on top of that, and due to our karma, others' karma, due to our delusions, other delusions, then again so many conflicts arises. Again and again. So many challenges, problem arises again and again, again and again. We feel we are done with that. We feel we have found the solutions, relief, to find out that wasn't the case. Again, problems. Not exact problem, similar problem. Or if not similar, another problems. Keep on. That is part of the life as long as we are not free from the delusion karma. That continue. That never ends. Until we are able to free ourselves and our mind from the delusion and karma, contaminated karma. Once we are able to free our mind from the control or the influence of the delusion and contaminated karma, then that is where you have permanent relief. Then it doesn't bother you. It is not conflict for you. It's not problem for you. It's not pain for you. The other person can try to create problem to you. The other person can try to make your life miserable and difficult. But from your side, it doesn't become problem. From your side, it's not difficult. From your side, is another problem. From your side is another, because there is no delusion that bother your mind to see in that all of that. So you cannot change the others. You cannot change the world so easily in that way. And you might not be able to change their behavior, their actions, their attitude. But when you yourself is free from the delusion and that karma, no matter how they respond, no matter how they react, no matter how their attitude, their action, it doesn't bother you. It doesn't disturb your mind. It doesn't disturb your peace, calm. It doesn't make you depressed, upset, angry, frustrated, any of those things. Any of those things. And because of all that, from your side, there's no conflict. From your side, is not a problems. If other one has problem from their side, it's their things. If others feel it is a problem from their side, that is their things. So yeah. With that understanding, the nature of the samsara, meaning as long as we are our mind and we are under the influence or control of the delusion karma, there's never permanent, lasting relief. Problem, suffering continues all the time, one after another, one after another. We feel it is exhausting to have to encounter one after another, never ending. But that is the reality, that is the nature of the samsara. So if we feel exhausted with that and if we don't want to repeat that continuously, then we have to get rid of the delusion and karma. We have to work with our mind so that we can get rid of those delusion karma. And when you get rid of those delusion and contaminated karma created by this delusion, then there's no more of that. There's no more of that. Mm. So those are the 4 preliminary practices. So in that 7-point mind training, the first, it says first train into the preliminary practices. So that is what it is. That is the first verse of the actual practice. The root text, it says, first train in the preliminaries. Preliminary practices or preliminaries. And what are those preliminary practices? So that is what we just know. Maintaining the awareness of the present human life all the time, be aware of that this reality of this, the life come to end, everyone in samsara has to die eventually, so being aware of that awareness again all the times, and recalling, how our actions has consequences, whether it's virtues or non-virtues, whether it's healthy, unhealthy, wholesome, unwholesome. Every action has a result, consequences, thereby trying to avoid those unwholesome, non-virtuous actions as much as possible, trying to engage in the virtues and wholesome action as much as possible by being aware and mindful of, understanding what goes around comes around. What you sow, what you get, through that kind of understanding, awareness, then, recalling that and then trying to, avoid the unwholesome action, engage in wholesome action. And then fourthly, the fourth is understanding the nature of the samsara, and having that awareness, that understanding, how the nature of samsara is, there's no kind of permanent end to problem and suffering and pain, If there is any relief, it's only temporary. There's no permanent relief. So with that understanding, then we try to, if I want permanent relief, not just a temporary relief, which we used to get time to time and again exhausted and again, never ending. If we want permanent relief, then the key is to get out of samsara, free from the samsara. What does that mean? Freeing from the samsara means freeing from your mind and yourself from the delusions and the contaminated karma. And that is again why Buddha emphasized, and in Buddhism, the main practice is working with your mind. It's always working with your mind. That is what it is. All the teaching, all the practice are related with that. Always working with your mind. Working with your mind, meaning, trying to reduce and, destroy those harmful, negative, disturbing emotions, and trying to cultivate and develop those positive, healthy, beneficial, healthy attitude, mind, That is all Buddha's teachings are about that. all the Buddhist practice are about that. In essence, it should be leading towards that. Whatever different form of practice you do, meditation, form of practice or meditation, it should always lead to that, on fundamentally on that, towards that. If it is not leading towards that, then there's something wrong with our practice, meditations. You know, the more meditation you do, the more practice you do, it should lead towards that, to reduce some of those afflictive emotions, disturbing emotions, to improve and increase one of those helpful, positive emotions. Yeah, so I think that is all for today. So today we finish the preliminary, okay? So any questions? I can take one, two, if you have any questions. There is a, yeah, time for one or two. If anyone, yes, please. There is two, yeah.
Could you suggest a specific practice that we could do for those of us that are on the easy path?
Yeah, I'm also looking for that. I was hoping that you had the answer, because I have only the difficult one. Because I have the only thing I can suggest is the difficult path, and long and difficult path.
Is there a particular text that we could refer to do the practices you're suggesting?
Yeah, you know. As I said, you know, those preliminary practices are in, there are so many different lumbering practices, texts, written by different masters, different versions, long, medium, short, you know, and so many now in English, and also many commentary by more contemporary teachers, you know, our time, not only by those earlier masters, but even in our times. So there are many, some of, you know, so I think, you know, so definitely you can find in those resources, you know, of course, there are some texts which go in much more extensive detail, and then there are some which kind of summarize the main practices, the main concept without going in so details. So, you know, depending on you, how you want to study, how you want to, how depth or how detailed one want to go or not, then one can find in, you know, some people like to go more depth and have all the details. Some people like more the summarized essence of those, and that, you know, so depending on that, individuals' interests, inclinations, then I think there are a lot of resources. Yeah.
There are quite a few choices here. Should we just jump in and not bother about it?
Yeah, I think that is the key. You know, I think that is why, I guess, the mentor guru comes into play, because the teachings are more general, because everyone's different, and so it has to be guided according to their needs. So I cannot suggest one thing for everyone's, you know, one particular text for everyone's. Some get more inspiration, more connected with Lama Tsongkhapas. Maybe some might be more connected and interested and inclined to Pabonga Rinpoche's commentaries, or some of, you know, Panchen Lamas, commentaries or Dalai Lama's commentaries or some of them, So again, and also in terms of practice, also different people have slightly different inclination in what practice they want to do, Some different people have different. So that is why the text, everything is more kind of like general advices. But then the mentor help you to have more specific kind of, what practice you do. How do you find that one? How is this helpful? Is it not helpful? Or this is not helpful. I did this practice, meditation, and I find it wasn't having any effect. I wasn't finding any beneficial, or I was having some struggles. And so then the teacher can kind of guide, oh, maybe you should try this. You should try to do slightly different this way or this way. And so that is how the mentors comes, because it has to be more specific in that way to have a, so because one specific text, meditation technique, method that someone finds very extremely beneficial, someone can have very challenges. And they might be able to open their mind and experience when they try different technique, different meditations. And so therefore that is why I always say, sometimes we find Buddhism, and especially in Tibetan Buddhism, they're too much, overwhelming. Why don't we have just like Bible, one book, small, why don't we have something like one small Bible and we just take it and we just read it, we just do it easy, Why is all this, look at this, all these volumes and volumes of scriptures stack up there. And why do we need that, And that is why, because Buddha gave, and including later his followers, earlier Indian master and later Indian master and Tibetan masters, there are so many because our inclinations are different, our mind interests are different, our mind is slightly different, our karma is slightly different, our predisposition is slightly different. And according to that, then different method is needed. And therefore, there are so many methods there. So we're trying to learn all of them. So then it becomes like, but once, as I always say, once you study and you figure out this particular practice method is effective, then you don't have to study all others method, everything. So you don't have to be overwhelmed by all of that, And so that is the key. And so I think, so that's why it's hard for me to say generalize and say this is good for everyone, just as simple like that. Yeah. So I know you didn't get the answer you want.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. So there, back. You had questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I met a woman who's traveling from Italy up in Taos.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been going through language meanings and this kind of thing. And is there another word besides mindfulness? Because we're wanting to cultivate emptiness, and then mindfulness to me is talking about a full mind, But like in Tibetan or something, like I'm just joking around basically, but what would be another word instead of mindfulness? Would it be like self-awareness?
I'm not expert in English, so it is hard for me to say. In Tibetan, we have Tenpa or Tenche, that is what mindfulness is translated.
Could you say it again, please?
Tenpa.
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 Tempa?
Yeah. Tenpa can be translated as memory, recollections, mindfulness depending on how you use in context. In Tibetan, it's the same word, but it changes how you use in the context. Tempa can mean memory, my previous memory, that could be one memory, recollecting of memory. Also, it could be like what we translate as a mindfulness, in a sense that you try to hold the objects and not losing or not forgetting the objects from your mind. If we go more kind of specific kind of definitions, not forgetting or losing the familiar objects. So your mind familiarizes one object, whether it's a bread, whether it's the image of Buddha, or whether let's say, the image of the flowers. So that is something your mind is familiar with, you try to hold. And so then you try to keep your mind there without forgetting that object or without losing that object. So that is, and it's one of the mental factors, So that is where it is translated as mindfulness. But of course, it depends how people use that generally, I think just like karma, and I think nowadays people can misunderstand karma because they use very general, the very vague understanding, not the depth understanding. And that can be same with the mindfulness. The word has become so common, but I think maybe different people might use very differently, in a very loose way. And in Tibetan, it's very specific word you just use for that. It has definitions, specific definition. But nowadays, maybe people use those words, whether it's karma, whether it's samsara, even samsara. It has become kind of more common word, and I think different people use very loosely, differently. So sometimes you have to ask, what does that mean? Yes. Yeah, then after Nan and then Mark, then we will finish because we are late. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that.
Yep.
So the word drenshi, what does that mean?
Tempa means, as I get the definitions, tempa. Tenshe she means tempa and session, which means the introspections, mindful in introspections. That is an introspection mind. Of course, again, there is many different English translations, introspection, vigilant, what are the other words they have used? Vigilant, alertness. Different translations have used different terms for that. In Tibetan, it's session, and that is the mind. Again, is a mental factors, one of the mental factors, and that is the mind that investigate whether my mind is with the object or not, time to time, investigating mind, whether my mind is still with the object or not, whether my mind is getting excited, whether my mind is getting kind of dull or not. So there's one mind that does that. And then there's one mind that keep your mind there. So Tempa is the mind that keep you on there. And then Session, introspection mind, is that time to time that it does that analyzing whether your mind is with the object or not. So those are two different minds, but when they practice, they go more together.
Thank you.
And here, that will be the last. Yeah.
Back on the subject of finding practices, they don't have to be in a thick book, they're secret or something like that. A couple of years ago, on Sunday mornings, I would watch Mary bustle around, filling the water bowls and flowers and doing all this stuff. And so I decided to take on as a practice cooking breakfast. But cooking breakfast calmly, without, wild obscurations, just making it through cooking breakfast. And I've been doing it for like 18 months now, or 2 years. It's been wonderful, wonderful, wonderful practice. I've learned a ton.
Thank you for sharing your practice. Someone has question? What?
Just really quickly, that last question, when
Uh-huh.
you were describing introspection,
Uh.
would that be similar to what we might call witness mind? And does Buddhism have any use of that term?
Again, awareness, the way different translation, different teacher uses, again, so loosely. Sometimes in Dzogchen, there's a rikpa, they use for that, which is, again, and then sometimes in Tibetan, we have lo rik shesum, and all are same things. It's a different term, lo rik she, mind, consciousness, awareness, but they all mean same. And why we call consciousness, there is certain reasons. Why we call mind, there is certain reason. Why we call awareness, but actually is referring to the same thing, is so in the scriptures, there is a, lo, rik, she, shepa, and so again, it depends. So in that cases, then that awareness means just a mind. But in some other cases, then we are referring to a different mind. It's not all the general mind of consciousness. It's referring to very specific mind, mental factors, So again, that is the problem with the language, especially the English language. I think because so many different translators use different terms, there's no consensus that we all are going to use the same word, this English term for this, whether you are referring to Tibetan or Sanskrit or Pali, same term. We don't use that. And that is why it can be sometimes confusing, because you might think this is what it means, but actually it's not, because the translators are using that term for different things or differently. So in Tibet, they didn't have that problems. When the first Buddhism came to Tibet, through the support of the king at that time, the states sponsored that, and so then they put all the translators, their conference, and they all decided consensually, we'll use this term for this translation, and one agreements. And then after once they have agreement, and that was the rule, everyone has to use that term for that. If you are translating that term, and so then there is less confusion in that, But I think English is so difficult. Forget about all the translations, even Tibetan, I think at least FMT is just once within the Tibetan Buddhism, is just only one organization. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche wanted, at least there is some kind of consensus among the translation of FMT in that. And there are some meetings, I think at least 1, 2, or 3 among the translators, they couldn't agree. They couldn't agree, so they couldn't come with the final, because one said this is better word, others said this is better word, so they wouldn't agree that we will use this word for all of that. And so that seems to be quite difficult. Yeah.
So following the practicality of gills being the foil to Geshe-la's teaching. What, for beginners especially, or people who are doing it again, what would this subject really be covered in, say, discovering Buddhism? If somebody really wanted to go into these last couple of questions. Or Rachel might know.
What?
I mean, this, if you're looking for one specific module, it would be practicing the path, but we should do all of them.
So for in discovering Buddhism, that module.
Okay. Thank you for all the questions, yeah, dedication.
So we're dedicating. May all beings everywhere plagued by sufferings of body and mind obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with the mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And I think the essence of the Buddhism, especially the Mahayana Buddhism, is practicing the two bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. That is the main. And to support that practice, then those preliminary helps, to have more stronger practice of that conventional ultimate bodhicitta practice. So that is the essence. That is where all the teachings, all the Bodhisattva's teachings, Mahayana teachings, as well as his own Dalai Lama encourage, all of us to work towards that. Yeah, okay. And unfortunately, I will not be able to join the potluck today because two other geshes are waiting. So, but enjoy, and I will be in spirit. Thank you, thank you.